Hey, Rice here. We're going to take a look at how to use the pivot table function for getpivotdata, because that seems really useful at this point, and it's a way to do expressions and equations based on pivot table data without needing to specifically identify a tile, but instead reference what's in the cell instead of just its location. So we've got a couple things that we're going to take a look at with this. The first off is that you can see here we've got a few things going on. This is a pivot table that shows the yard line and then how many plays were played at that yard line and what those plays were. So what the offensive play actually was. You can see over here my pivot table controls have all popped up because I'm clicking in the pivot table area. So this is a useful thing. The pivot table starts with wherever your top leftmost block is. And so for me right now that's A3, that's where the pivot table's anchored. And so anytime I reference this table, it'll actually reference back to that cell, which is a little weird, but I guess that's how it works. And then here are the other things that have been set up. It's the sum of values, the count of offensive plays of that type at each yard line and then at each type of play. And so you can do that analysis by doing it mechanically. And so here you click on the cell, it says 50%. Somebody typed in, Jeremy typed in 50% for these analyses. Here it's 100 because it's just the 100, 50-50, 100, and so all those were typed in. Now there is down here, you get to these where it says reference and these 50%, you can see it's very different. So it's not that 50% was typed in, it's this function, the getpivotdata function. Now if you're ever stuck with what a function is or does, you can always click on its help menu down here. And so you can see that it's going to pop up a whole help menu, and it's taking it a second, right? It connects to the internet and it pulls the data from there. But then once this is up, you can see that this is the formula, syntax, and usage of getpivotdata function in Microsoft Excel. So it talks about the data field. This is required. This is the name, the enclosed, the name for the data field that has the data you want to retrieve, and the pivot table. So this identifies the pivot table, and in our case, that's A3. And then here's the field and the item, the field and the item. And so if you want to specifically pick one type of thing, you'll need to do that. And here it has an example. And if you really want to see more, there's examples, there's formulas, there's some results for that. And you could probably even look up somebody, maybe, so there's a video on this one, I don't know. But what we'll do is we'll take a look at what this means and try and understand it. So this is, for right here, we want to keep in mind what we're looking at. So this is getpivotdata for the offensive play, which is the name of this. So the data field would be the B slant. Offensive play is for what this type of information is. This is the offensive play. That's the specific name of the offensive play. And so you're looking in the off play area. And then A3 is the pivot table. So that's the name of the pivot table up here. And then there's yard line and D19 and off play and A19. There's a lot of stuff that happens here. There's a lot going on. So let's first try and better understand this by taking one of these, and we're just going to do equals, and then I'm going to click on this cell. And so when I do that, you'll see it fills in the getPivotData function automatically. Instead of clicking on B14, which is what that is, it fills in this stuff. And so it says that I'm looking at the offensive play, and I'm looking at A3. So A3 is just the pivot table that I'm looking at, still at A3. The yard line and 44 are then some parameters. So this is field 1, item 1. So I want to know what the number is. And this is the yard line. It's looking at yard line 44. And so it's specifically saying when you're looking at yard line 44, I want that data. And the other condition is that the offensive play needs to be the option. So there's a few different things that are going on here. I can say I want it to be the option a couple of ways. I can either leave it like that, or maybe I want to click on this on A14. And now it's going to look there to say, well, I want this to be for the option play, but it doesn't know that it's the option. I'm not putting in a fixed value. I'm saying go to the option, go to the cell and look at that value. So it's corresponding this data now to the option play name without definitively saying that. And we're going to see why that's useful in a second. So I can do that. And then the other thing is yard line 44. I'm going to leave that for a second. The reason that I changed this to A14 instead of leaving it option is because now I can take this and come down here. Now these are just giving me the counts, the amount of them. So it's going to come up as 100, but really it's not a percentage, it's just a general number. So it's counting off the 1. It's telling me what's in this cell right here. And that's useful, but not as useful in this case as having a percentage. So what I want to do is say, well, I don't want to do that. I want to say, let's take this and divide by that cell, which is how much is going on, because that would give me a fraction, and that's going to be more like a percentage. So that'll be useful. You'll also notice that for the second getPivotData, it's a lot smaller. So this tells me what I'm looking for, the data field in the pivot table. So that's just identifying that I want this pivot table and looking at this level. And then it only specifies that the yard line is 44. So how many plays were on yard line 44 is what it's asking. And so it's going to be 2 all the time. It doesn't matter what I change. It's going to be that if I scroll this down. Now you'll notice it changes up here. It's looking at the option play. And down here it's looking at the stretch play. But in both cases it's looking at yard line 44. And if I want to make this even more generic, I could put in negative 44 over here. Say that's my negative 44 yard line that I want to be considering. And then I can say, instead of having these fixed negative 44s, why don't I look at the cell that's just to the right, and I'll just say that that's, and I'll fill it with whatever I want to fill it with. So both of those will just be referring to negative 44, and you'll see nothing changes, which maybe doesn't immediately seem useful. But then I've got this function. It's all tied in here, and it may not be useful right there, but I can take this and drag it all the way down. And it does a lot of things. So a lot of stuff look like it just broke. I'm going to make these all percentages because that's what I care about. Let's give them a couple decimal places. And then what I'm going to do is say these are both at the 44, so I'll call them 44. This one is at negative 43, and so you'll see it drops in as a 1. These are negative 42s, they're 50-50. And down here I've got some, there's 4, but they aren't evenly distributed, so this will be more interesting. This is at the negative 38 yard line, negative 38, negative 38. You can see it broke down proportionate to what's there. So I was able to use one function, and this would be negative 39. There's just a little compulsion. All right, this function lets me just specify the yard line again over here to the right, and then I can be clear about what it is that I want to see. So there's a lot that's going on here, and maybe if I even took this and tried to unpack it a little bit further, I might be able to figure out how to get the yard line to be something that spills out of each one of these positions so that I don't even have to have that second column on the right, so that I can be a little bit more slick with my functions. But if this bothers me, I can realistically just hide this and get rid of it so that it's clear what's going on there. And then the only downside to this is that I have the references there on all the green lines, which I don't really care about. That's fine with me. And I can unhide all these, type in all my yard lines, and then I can get a full set of percentages for all of this, which could be useful. Maybe that's a little bit easier for me to see than the numbers, a little easier to make sense of. I could also do something crazy like this and then do conditional formatting and say like, well, this is the green is the most likely to see and red is the least likely to see, and now you can sort of visually assess that for the negative 30 yard line by using the conditional formatting color scales. So you can set things up nice and quick to have a real quick evaluation. So that's a whirlwind look into the getPivotData function and a few other tricks that could be useful for this. So hopefully that'll help you automate your pivot table interpretation. See ya.